So we're working on some stuff, and this is like an early version of what you might view as the Oscar goals. So I want to contextualize the Oscar goals, and we're going to put network in the middle of that. So here, Oscar's goal, in very simple terms, is make it easier and more affordable to live a healthy life. And in other words, you've got three things in there. You've got the experience and the ease of getting healthcare and navigating the healthcare system. You've got healthy, meaning higher quality care, living a healthy life, and then you've got the affordability concept. And so those are really the three things that we focus on. And again, it's not necessarily in the context of being an insurance company. It doesn't say be the best insurance company we can. The line, we think, between being a healthcare provider, being an insurer, I think that's a somewhat artificial distinction. We want to be in people's lives and help them make it easy and cheap, affordable to meet their healthcare goals, essentially. Okay. And then how are we actually going to go do that? So at a high level, and this is there's I think a novel statement being made by the creation of Oscar. It's not we're just going to be a health insurance company. It's something very particular statement, and it's that we're going to, unlike the other insurance companies, I think you look at how healthcare is run, you get large people-run organizations like Aetna, Humana, United, etc., hospital systems, and then you have technology folks, and you had Google Health, and you had that sort of thing, and we're trying to do both, and I think that's really in essence of how we're trying to design the company, how we all work, how we work with data, data, product, etc., is that we're trying to combine technology in with people to create a holistic product offering together. And so that's the first part. And then the second part is, what are we doing with that people and technology combination? Well, we're going to connect with members. So we're going to have a great member experience, and we're going to really connect with them in their lives. And then we're going to help them find the best care for them at the right time. Sometimes that'll be providing the care ourselves. Sometimes it'll be making it really easy, and we'll talk about the partner program, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes it'll be giving them advice on whether they need to go to the emergency room or not. So it's all of those things. But the high-level goal, the strategy of the company is people and technology connect deeply with members and get them to the best care, the right care for them. Okay? It seems very simple, but I think it's good to clarify because that's really the foundation of everything we're doing on the team is in service of that. Simple? Make sense so far? Okay. Okay. So, and this is just a little bit of, I think, what's going on today, and we'll talk about what this means for the near term. But my sense of where we are today is we've got like a really great and growing buzz reputation within both technology, obviously Google and Alphabet, but also the healthcare worlds. A lot of major players in almost every facet of healthcare are sort of knocking on our door saying, hey, what do you guys got going? And we'll talk some more about the particulars of that and who we might think about working with. So that's the first one. I think we actually rapidly are achieving a product market fit in individual, by which I mean something that is good and sells and makes money. That was actually not true 2 or 3 years ago when the MLR was at 120 and our membership was went from this to kind of this, right? But now we're back. Our MLR is likely to land in the mid to low 80s this year. I think that's a great achievement. And we're growing like heck. We almost tripled this year. We're going to grow, I think, pretty notably next year. We'll see exactly how that comes out, what number that is, but pretty meaningful growth. So we've got this thing called individual that seems to be working pretty well. And one of the things which I'll talk about in the near term is one of our goals is just to scale that thing. And really our team, as much as anybody, is in charge of scaling that thing. Choosing the cities, getting the provider contracts, making all of our operations, data, provider services all work. We're in a very good financial position for the next 2 to 3 years. That's cool. So we don't have to worry about that. We will have to, honestly, the way healthcare works is we have to be thinking 2 to 3 years out. That's going to come around tomorrow. We're already planning for 2020. So 2021 is just around the corner, and so we have to make make sure we're financially responsible. But if we do have a good 2 to 3 years, we probably won't have to worry about much raising money after that. But anyway, at the very least, we have that sort of runway with which to experiment. We don't yet have a good product market fit in small group or Medicare Advantage. We've got just getting it going in small group, and we really need to test some of the big network changes that we're making there. We'll see how that goes. That's an experimentation phase. And MA is almost pre-experimentation phase, where we're really just getting going on that. And I think so, and we don't want to be a company that's just an individual-only insurance plan. We want to make sure that we're having a broader impact on people's lives in the country. So, and it's also good from a diversification of business lines to do that. Okay? And then, as I said, we still need to scale. So we are subscale. We're going to lose about $100 million this year. We're going to lose hopefully less than that next year, but still probably lose money. And so we need to, in order to be a profitable business, we need to work on scaling. Yeah.
It's more an Oscar question than a network question, but it seems like such a key part of all this is scaling, and we're going into OE without a head of marketing. Do you worry about that as like a big risk?
Well, let's see. Literally that one role?
Yes.
No, I think it'll be fine. Because I think we've done a good amount. So we've really laid the groundwork of how the formula works, and Sarah has really done a great job before she left setting that up. We also have, I think, a really good, strong sales team in Nick and Lewis and that crew. So I'm less worried. I think the marketing thing doesn't have as clear a leader, but I think we have something of a formula to run that, and I think the sales team is good and strong. So of all the risks, that this particular one is not. Obviously, that's not great, but that's not personally flagging on top of my head for things I'm most worried about. Yeah.
Do we have a sense for what has worked for individual that hasn't necessarily worked for small group, and what is the next thing we're trying for small group?
Yeah, the basic thing, the biggest thing is network size and type. So super narrow networks work in individual. They do not work in small group, at least to the same size, to the same degree, or at least not yet until the whole ecosystem changes a bit. So that's the biggest thing. That's the biggest thing we're trying in New York is a dual network offering. So we have a narrow network, but then we partner it with a broader network. That's the biggest thing. What we're also finding is that there's a lot of things that are very specific state by state, broker relationships, how HSA plans work or don't work, and how do we do telemedicine here and there, all these regulations and whatever, that we're finding it's very bespoke to the individual market in a way that the individual is a little more standardized across. And so it just requires a little more patience, a little more investment to make it there, and I think a different network type. And so that's the current hypothesis, which we're going to test out in New York pretty fast here is, hey, if you had this dual network, and you spent some time getting the broker connections, and you smoothed out all the state individual sales, regulatory product stuff, then are we good? And what can we really expect from it? And so I think that's why New York will be a good experiment over the next year to see whether that will really work. Okay, so that's a little bit about where we are. So I'm going to now zoom out and really go into the basics of how over the next 5 years we think about building networks, managing networks, and that sort of thing. And again, I've hopefully gotten a lot of input and feedback from a lot of you. Please feel free to push back and ask questions. So more or less, and this is not, it depends market by market, but this is kind of what the provider networks look like in terms of spend. So in terms of non-pharmacy spend. So about 60% of it goes to the hospitals, 30% of it goes to doctors, 10% of it goes to other ancillary facilities, more or less. And then within that, importantly, 30% of the doctors, it's about a third, but about a third work at the hospital systems, about a third come in via IPAs controlled by the hospital systems, and about a third are totally independent. And again, very different market by market, network by network, or whatever. But I think this has big implications for how things work. So, so keep that in the back of your mind. Now I want to talk about exactly what we mean by our goals. If you remember, we had easier, more affordable, better member experience, right? When we think about building networks, that's very key. And this is some of the stuff the research team, Curious's been working on, et cetera, has been doing, but is measuring which doctors are doing well and poorly. And so basically this is just a description of how we measure, which is our overall notion of how good a provider is doing. We call that value. and we add it, and that's composed of their cost and affordability, the member experience they're giving, and the clinical quality. And the research team, again, with some of our input, the research team is really responsible for figuring out how to measure which doctors are doing what along these ways. And they've built a lot of algorithms that put out histograms every day that literally rank every single doctor between doing really well and not doing so well. Yeah? And what we found, and many of you have seen this already, what we found is that there's no correlation between the cost and the quality of doctors. And that's also reconciled with any external research we've seen, et cetera, is that there's no correlation between how well providers are performing on cost and how well they're performing on quality. And it makes sense because also the amount that a doctor gets paid is actually not at all the biggest driver here. That's only about 1/5 of the output, so it's the literal unit cost the doctor gets. The rest of it is whether they do their colonoscopies in the office or not, where do they do their surgeries, where do they send their MRIs, all of that stuff, which matters about 80% of the value. So even if it was true that higher paid doctors were delivering better quality, which is not the case, even then, the vast majority of cost is not how much doctors get paid. Okay, and then therefore we've highlighted these green boxes here. That is which is basically kind of the goal for the network team, in a sense. It's taking that very high level company goal and making it a little more concrete, which is these are the doctors that have a better than average member experience and are less costly than average, or better clinical output and less costly than average. Right? So that's just recontextualizing. Really, our goal as a team is to run a national network and a national provider ecosystem that somehow helps more of our members go into the green boxes. Right? Make sense? Okay. Now, so how do we do that? Right? There are a few different ways that we can do that. Here, great. So I'm going to now go back to this notion of the hospital ecosystem and think it through. So there's basically two, as we talked about, there's hospitals, hospital systems, and then doctors, right? Hospital systems get paid more from the more people in the hospital. They tend to be the relatively low competition, oligopolies. There's usually one or a couple in a different area. Despite all the progress that's been made, the vast majority of their compensation still comes from fee-for-service. They're really not very value-oriented yet. They're usually pretty inefficient and slow-moving, largely because they're large oligopoly nonprofits, and we're usually a very small part of their business. At most, 7%, but usually only a few percent. Okay, so that's that. And meanwhile, doctors control the access to the hospital, but they don't usually get paid much more. They don't get paid much more for facility claims, right? In other words, they don't get, if the hospital gets paid a higher facility claim, they don't get necessarily paid more on the facility claim. There are usually a lot more of them. There's hundreds by each specialty. That's not always true, but it's usually true. They're increasingly aware of value as more people move to MA, the individual market. That's, I think, a bigger part of how doctors are getting paid. You see GenMeds and Oshri, which literally only take value-based deals. And some, because there's so many of them, some really are innovative and tech-oriented and want to do things differently. And finally, we can become a much bigger share of their business than hospital systems, right? So now you have this world where the hospitals are slow-moving, a pain to work with, but they're a huge portion of the spend, whereas the doctors control access to the hospitals to a certain degree, and in pockets are a lot easier to work with. Okay, that's the basic essence of it. And so, basically, at a high level, we just got to do two things. This is the high-level strategy: is we need to make sure we get great unit costs with hospital systems, and then we want to build a preferred network of doctors and get members to them. Yeah, and you can see the reasons why. So because we have this goal of getting more people to the high-value care, and then when we look at the ecosystem, we're looking at it and we're saying, how are we going to get, how are we going to drive that through our ecosystem? But with the hospitals, we can drive better unit costs, and with the doctors, that's where we really want to innovate on changing their behaviors, routing them to the right folks, etc. Does that make sense up until now? I'll go more depth. So how are we going to do better unit costs to hospitals? And I forgot one big point on this one. The first one, which is a key point, which we've already done a good bit of, is choose the right hospital systems that deliver great care and do it at an efficient cost. So we've already done that to a certain extent, as you've seen us select Mount Sinai out of the Manhattan hospitals, and et cetera. We have Tenet in San Antonio, and we have these different individual players. So a big part is go to a narrow network design. And that's a really important part of what we do. So we will not have everyone in the market. We'll pick the ones that we want to work with, and that will enable us to drive just better costs in negotiation. So again, that's a miss on this thing. That should just be bullet point number one. That's really the biggest thing that we've done historically to date in driving good unit costs. And that's something that Josh is working on, the partnership team's working on when we think about new markets, is who will we work with and how will we build these networks overall. Okay? Should we open up a window? It's good. So that's the first one. The second one, which I'd say we're partway through, maybe we're getting close to the way through, is build a really good system for negotiating hospital deals. And so a lot of you have seen a lot of the work and it's been really a lot of work on the research team and the analytics team as well, is building out our hospital go-out generator, all the tools so we can evaluate a hospital contract, etc. As well as some on the strategy side and the contracting side, how do we create an ecosystem so that, like as Jared knows, this is the unit cost that we will agree with this type of provider. We don't go over that. There's checks and balances in place on that, etc. And that actually also applies to the SCA team, all the checks and balances, workflows, processes in place there. That's also sort of a part of really running a tight ship on how do we negotiate things. And I'd say we've gone from somewhat unmitigated chaos to a much tighter thing. There's still, I think, a lot of good work that we need to do about how do we monitor and measure that stuff. Okay. Then the last thing is we want to work with hospitals where possible, but we won't expect the hospital systems to differentiate by lowering the total cost of care. By which I mean we're not going to rely on the Cleveland Clinic's desire to keep people out of the Cleveland Clinic as the way in which we're going to deliver lower cost, higher quality care. Because, and you can see in the case of Cleveland, Cleveland's not even sure, even though some people in the organization maybe have said maybe they want to, they're not even sure whether that's what their strategy is on value-based care, and should they want to do value-based care or not. And I think a lot of hospital systems are in that spot where they're not sure if they really want to do value-based care, and even the ones who are move relatively slowly, and it's more of a challenge. So again, I'm not saying that that's never, and we should never work with a hospital system on lowering the total cost of care, but it is more of a challenge. As an evidence of that, if you look at shared savings in Medicare, and you break it down by who's actually generated savings in Medicare, hospitals or doctor groups, basically the hospitals haven't generated much of anything, and the vast majority of the high-performing lowering the total cost of care groups in Medicare have been doctor-led organizations. And so that sort of is a reinforcement, I think, of this view. Again, it's not a situation where we say never, but it's not where we're going to hang our hat, I think, in terms of what we really want to do. Yeah? Yeah.
So on that point, when we try and go get better unit costs, we're basically driving more volume. Big system, we drive more volume to them. In exchange, we get better unit costs. I think to Gunjan's question, we get a little stuck in the small group because that happens by narrowing the network.
Yep.
And then the small group need a broader network. So the other lever would be we're getting better unit costs not because we're driving more volume, but because we lower the overhead of the partner we're working with, whether it's a bigger position or a system.
Correct. And so that's definitely in B, the second sentence in B. Instead, we will look to be the easiest insurance company to work with and add other technology benefits to the health systems. Okay? And so that we should definitely be working with health systems, and those relationships are vital to the success of Oscar. I want to be clear about that. And so, however, it's just how we work with them. I think we need to shift a little bit or be focused a little bit.
Can you talk about what the like interaction between the network who actually does this piece and the tech, and kind of grease the wheels in that piece, how it works, and how that might work together in the future.
Sure. So we've got a head, you mean organizationally?
Yes.
So we've got a head of provider product. That's NAHA. Essentially, it's a partnership, in my view, between Monica's org and NAHA on that, and to a certain degree, Capco depends, but predominantly Monica and NAHA are partners in that together. And Monica would say, here are the things I think the hospitals would be interested in, and I knew these people who would want to work with this and this, that, and the other. And then NAHA would say, well, here's the features we could build. I know that we could do this on CRT, and we could do that on claims processing, and we could do this in terms of scheduling, and whatever, and we could give them an app that they really like in such a way, and that's really a collaboration there to come up with an offering that we would say to a hospital system, this is pretty cool, do you want to do this? And so we're literally in those conversations with a lot of major hospital systems now about literally, hey, what would you want to do, and what would it take to get better unit cost for us to be your preferred provider? And I think we're going to use that in two ways. Well, before I go to that, but does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. And then we'll use that, I think, in a couple of ways. The first is in individual markets. It'll be like the notions of, can we get a 5% discount if we make your life incredibly easier on how we pay process claims, how we do gold carding and CRT, what technology we give you to connect with your members, etc. So like a 5% discount would be a great tailwind. The other thing is I think it will make it much easier to build broader networks that are useful for small group, because right now our pitch to providers is more, we'll build a narrow network around you and drive volume. That's the essence of our pitch. That doesn't really work for a broader network. We need a different pitch. That pitch around, okay, maybe we'll cut out a little bit of narrowing in the network, but really what we're going to do is we're going to be the best person for you to work with. And that's a really compelling thing to come to a new town and say, we're going to make it really easy to work with us. Then we have a pitch. And we can take that on the road. And so I think that will have, we need a certain type of deal for individual, a different type of deal for small group. But either way, this bullet point B, I think, will be huge and really, really impactful if we can get it going. Questions? Does that make sense? Resonate to folks? Okay.
I would just say that because insurance company work for the idea of making things accurately, faster, like recording all of those sorts of things. I think that's going to give them more leverage, and at least right now, in some of the flashier, like what sort of features of the provider portal can we offer you right now? I guess like for hospital systems.
Yeah, I think as I've heard it, the hospital systems are interested in two things. The first, this is a little bit in the weeds, but we'll back up. The first, as you're saying, is ease of work, claim payment, CRT, blah, blah, blah. The second is building out their brand. And so like they want to be engaged, they sort of feel a lot, depends on the hospital system, but they feel as though the member comes there, gets a surgery, and then they never see them. And they don't know if the person identifies with their hospital, they just know the person had a surgery and then they never see them. So they'd like to be able to engage with the members, build a brand around them. And so those two things, I think, and we're pretty uniquely capable, given our member engagement, to help them with that thing. So in the long term, there's a lot of things we can do that. In the short term, things like co-branding and having an app that's, whatever things that we can do. Okay? So from there, we want to, this title is should be a little different, but anyway, this is then on the provider side, on the doctor side. So, okay, so we had talked about the hospital systems, what we're going to do there. The other thing that we need to do, I think, is really work with doctors to make sure we have as much as we can, those doctors in that green box, that it's we get as many members as we can to that green box, and that when doctors aren't in that green box, but they're already seeing a lot of members, that we help them improve their behaviors, okay? That's the basic thing that we're trying to do. So the first thing, as I showed you before, is we need to understand what does it mean to do healthcare well. And that's, I think, a really cool thing that we can do different and perhaps better than anybody else in the healthcare world, is really understand what does it mean to deliver the best care. Because we have all the claims data, we have the technology, we have the thinking to do this. And so I think we're early on in that journey, but I think we already have some very exciting things of, hey, we can actually say this person's doing it great, this person's not doing it so great, right? So that's the first thing that we really need. In order to do that, by the way, the only way you're going to do that is if you have amazing provider data, which is a really big thing. And if you don't know which orthopedist is a hand surgeon versus a hip surgeon, it's very hard to know which one's better, and it's apples to oranges, right? One's really costly. Well, that's because he's like this, does these weird surgeries. So if you don't really understand the providers, who they are, it's very difficult to build the metrics of what we're doing. So that's why Kevin's got his work cut out for him. Okay, so we really need to understand another way to build metrics, but understand our doctors well, their basic data, their specialties, and their performance. That's a huge part of this. The second thing is we need to choose the doctors for care routing based on their performance. So in other words, that means, and we say choose, that's for scheduling, for photos, for bios, all the stuff that Gunjan and her team, Efren, Sujal, et cetera, are doing. That means really making it easy to get to the green box. So hey, every specialty, you want a cardiologist, here's a great one. They have great reviews. By the way, here's a photo of them. You can just schedule an appointment tomorrow. If you want to know more information about their bio, there it is. Boom, right? So that's a huge part of what we're doing. A new thing that we're going to experiment with, that we're trying sort of by the end of this year, is think about removing doctors who are not performing well. And that'll probably be persistently underperforming, meaning that we've tried to say, hey, we've educated, can you please send your labs to here, not there? Can you please, you're doing your surgeries in a very expensive outpatient setting versus in your office, et cetera. Can you change those things? If they're persistent, then the notion of, okay, let's begin where possible to curate them out of the network. Yeah.
And that's easier to do with the independent physician. What have we found in terms of the performance from the hospital employee physician?
Right, this gets to the big issue here. This is why the care routing, the volume is such an important game. It would be nice if you could just sit here and be like, all right, well, I'm going to just it's like, a company where you just fire people if you want to fire them and hire whatever. Fire anybody. Not a good analogy. Anyway. Some other company. But we can't do that, right? We can't just select, we want this doctor, that doctor, because of this notion. So we sign a deal with Sinai, you want Sinai, 2/3 of the doctors are already come with you. So you're kind of tough. So then you're already down to 1/3. And yes, you can go after that 1/3, and you can begin to say, hey, listen, if you don't do better, we're going to get you out. But it's a problem. And to make it more complex, like doctors have multiple offices. So one doctor might be in the second office with some other doctor who's also employed by Sinai, and will okay, now I'm going to remove this other office, but then that office is then this mission go see the Sinai doctor, and he's going to go to my other office, and well, actually, we're going to deny that claim, it gets to be a huge mess. And so it actually turns out being way less than 30% of the doctors that we can actually remove, but that's not zero. And the nice thing is, you can really, you're 100% care routing and volume game, you're required to use this member engagement. Whereas this person's, they ain't working here anymore. Right. Does that make sense?
Do you think it's possible that if we had the data, even for the employed, that we can make the case to the hospital that based on an MPI level, we could pay different doctors different rates based on performance?
Well, that's really hard, I think, and that's kind of not what they do. They're really, maybe over some period of time, and we can build that, and the easiest way to do that is based on value, build it in based on value. But, again, every one of these contracts, the way they work, is it's not like the hospital's going to take less money in expected value terms. They're just still going to want their money. They might pay this doctor more, and that, if you don't pay this doctor less, you got to pay that doctor more, right? And so who cares? There's an element of who cares unless the hospital will educate those providers and or have it hit their paychecks, which very few hospital systems to the previous point are willing to do. So unless that change in compensation changes the behavior, it really doesn't amount to a whole hell of a lot. Yeah.
Given we know from the letters that independents are easier to work with on this front from a routing perspective, are we thinking as we expand like, how is our methodology for contracting the schedule being impacted by this?
Yeah, so the biggest thing is it's painful, but the biggest lever we have here is whether we give exclusivity on the physician side in networks. And so, for example, in Orlando, we have exclusivity in place. In San Antonio, we have exclusivity in place, meaning more or less this is zero in those markets for us. They exist, but they don't exist for us, right? And the reason why, as part of the deal that we get, because we're getting a better deal with the hospital, they like it because then they can encourage these doctors to go in there, which is sort of doing a deal with the devil a little bit for us, because largely we're helping Florida Hospital and Tenet and these places suck up more of the independent physicians. So that's painful. But sometimes we got to, break a few eggs to make an omelet. And so where we can, we like to keep this, and that's how we weigh deals on the strategy side. We like to keep this, but it's not a totally essential element. It's a very good element. And to be clear, we can still work with these people. We can still work with these people. That's good. We're having good success in Gunjan can tell you in San Antonio working with these people. And so that's okay, but it's better to have both. And we just have to weigh that appropriately. And where we can, we want as much of this as we can get, subject to reasonable unit cost and performance. Yeah? Okay. So now, I'm going back. Okay. So then, so 1, measure the doctors. 2, choose the right doctors to make it easy to get there. 3, remove the not so good ones. And then 4, again, this is what Gunjan and Megan are really working on, is further improving the performance of doctors. And we're early on in those stages. We have some, I'd say, nice, good indications, but it's really uncertain exactly how much of this we're going to be able to do. There's Gunjan's doing and Megan on this pilot on whether we can get doctors to code differently, which is a certain notion of behavior and improves their all-in total cost of care. So far, that's going good in some places and mediocre in other places, basically. And so we really need to continue to push that notion. We may not succeed in everything that we want doctors to do, or they're not our employees, and so we can't tell them to do exactly what we want them to do, and even then we have issues. So anyway, but that's I think a big thing that we really need to test out and see whether it's going to work for us. Yeah. And then the last thing is we need to make the whole thing a great experience. So it should feel like I go to a partner program doctor. Not only do I have the photo and the scheduling to get there fast, and not only is the doctor just a good doctor and providing good, efficient care with a great experience, but we want to work to see if there's other new and Oscar unique features that we can build in. Perhaps that some doctors will share their clinical notes back. It'll pop into the Oscar app, or whatever we can do. They get a mint, whatever it is, that makes it, okay, I had this great experience that was all together that I actually can't get if I'm not going to one of the cool Oscar doctors. And so that's a bit of a high-level vision, but I think that's also an important one for us to begin to experiment with. And how do we remember we have this company goal of making it great and fun and easy to get to the right care. And so we have to make sure that the whole thing loops together so that it's not just you're there and then see ya, but you're there and you're back in the ecosystem. It feels like a unique experience. So, and that's really, at this stage, more like brainstorming, whiteboarding, what do we mean? It's honestly really hard. Yeah, Joe.
Do you ever see in the network vision us coming to a point where we don't have enough leverage and we want to kind of pursue our own provider, kind of like the clinic with certain specialties more, or is that kind of not really been considered at this point?
We are good, and yeah, I think the thing that is right, Jason, this is care delivery and how much you want to do, right? So currently, the best thinking, our thinking is that in a commercial population, which is mostly episodic in nature in terms of their healthcare, it's mostly that the ROI on building physical clinics is not great. The ROI on doing virtual care is great, and because and I think there's a distinction there, and I think the outcome very well may be different in Medicare Advantage, given the more chronic nature of the population, chronic care needs. But if you are in a population where the vast majority of your costs come from people who have incidents, whether it's trauma, cancer, something like that, that's the vast majority of our costs. That it's harder. The clinic doesn't get you the same ROI because you're not really managing utilization as much from that. Whereas, let's say Medicare, that model, the much more building our own, very well may be necessary. Whether we do that in clinics, whether we put people in hospitals, there's a couple of different models out there. And how do we coordinate that with virtual care I think those are the questions we have to wrestle with the Medicare, but it's much more diabetes and COPD and blah, blah, blah. And those things really, I think, make physical clinics a much higher ROI. It's also why you're seeing ChenMed, Oak Street, those sorts of players in Medicare only, because the ROI on that business is a much higher, because the people are there, like how many people are there every week, they're like mall walks and gym classes and whatever, et cetera, et cetera. The other part of that, by the way, is sales, I will mention, where another huge reason to have a physical clinic is from a sales perspective. So a lot of Medicare players literally just bring people in, and oh, by the way, do you want to be interested in this health plan? And that's because in Medicare, if somebody's going to stay with you for 20 years, you can build a physical clinic and offer them a gym membership and all these things. And it pays for itself. In individual, where people stay with you for a couple of years and then get a job again, there's much less ROI from that sort of thing. Okay. So that's the basic high level of what we're doing. Again, so the basic thing is, I think we've got a pretty good thing going generally. We got to put in a ton of work to scaling it. So that's going to be a huge focus for our group. 8 to 10 cities next year if we can do it. In individual, 2 cities in Medicare. That's a ton. We'll see. Let's go after it. And all of the scale we need to hit that. Simultaneously improving our processes on hospitals, making sure we pick the right partners, that we negotiate and are operationally tight on that, and that we sort of integrate with them to make their lives easier and get good unit costs that way. And then on the doctor's side, measure them, get the great data, choose the right ones, volume, the right folks, remove the ones, improve the performance and behaviors, and make it a great experience. And that's kind of what we're doing. So all of the vitals that you all are working on really is one of those 3 big categories. Is scale this thing, run it, make it great, improve the way and run the way we negotiate with hospitals, get great costs, pick the right folks, and then run this ecosystem around the doctors. Pretty simple. And I think if we do that, we actually have a meaningful path forward to doing something totally different, better. I think if you go with some of the numbers Kirti's and others are showing is there's real MLR savings, real better member experience already that we've gotten. For example, the care routing, which is sort of in this world, which is one of the bullet points in this world, has already gotten us almost 0.5% of MLR, 30% of MLR, already improved our member experience by 5% or something like that in terms of average review rankings. So it's already, this stuff's already clicking in, and I think there's a lot we can go. And we haven't even gotten to behavior change. We haven't gotten to scaling to different specialties in these things. So there's a lot to do. And on the hospital side, we've already cut out 20 points by getting rid of New York Presbyterian and negotiating better rates. But I think there's a ton more that we can do on that side as well. Okay? Does that all resonate? Does it make sense? Does anybody feel like it's missing anything to make it a cohesive strategy? Okay. Yeah, Tracy.
One question is sort of, this is definitely the network-centric piece of everything I've vision. I'd be curious to almost hear on the member-centric side where their head is and then how we play into that, because there is going to be pieces of our work that may be because they have something that's likely not one of those 3 things there. Getting a bit more on that perspective, either from you or from someone else.
Yeah.
also on the clinical side too, like how we think about telemedicine longer term in terms of how we're going to scale that versus partnering with doctors and offices and stuff and things like that.
Yep,
Put the
agreed.
partners together.
I think that's great. Obviously, we hit some of that in terms of care delivery, and Dennis and I talked about this a ton, and in Chelsea as well. I think we should at some point get them in to talk about theirs and get the overlaps and share. So I think that's a very good suggestion. The thing that will be happening is I think Mario will be in to come talk to you all about company strategy. I think that's going to happen soon. We'll check his calendar, but he'll help you sort of contextualize this stuff at the higher level. I may have taken a little bit of the wind out of his sails, but that's when we'll all be well educated. Maybe last few questions. Okay? Yeah, Jim?
I think it was on like the previous vision document, there was the concept of centers of excellence. Is that something we're still thinking about, or is that kind of been tabled, or something we don't want to
Yeah,
pursue
so,
anymore?
The way to think about centers of excellence, it's definitely not inconsistent. It's basically just the ability. So you're limited by that green box. You're limited currently by a certain amount of travel distance. And it turns out that people don't travel that much for their healthcare. In New York, it's less than a mile. Even in LA, it's like less than 2 miles. Curation has the stats on this. It ain't that far, right? The whole notion of a center of excellence is whether you can, and the quality of the providers that we can offer is strictly a function of how far people are willing to travel. So, and the more that we can get that out, the more we can add, the better we can do on both of these. We can get better unit costs and we can get better doctors, right? And so it's very consistent with those two approaches. We aren't yet scoping to really go after that, so that's not like something that's in our hopper like in the next couple months because it's so big and important. But the idea is if you say, hey, I know you're used to traveling this far for your procedures. What happens if you travel this far, but you've had this amazing experience? My personal view of it is that that's much more likely in a second opinion sense, because it turns out that the centers of excellence tend to be very expensive. So you want to fly to this place, okay, it's pretty freaking expensive for that, because to get people to go there, you have to offer them something, usually a name brand, and it's very, very expensive. However, and usually like the outcomes don't really make up for it, really. However, in a second opinion sense, that really can make some sense. You're about to get back surgery in your local provider. Whoa, wouldn't you like to go to, name HSS or wherever the place is? Okay, well, yeah, actually I would. I'll get a second opinion. And then if the odds of you not getting the surgery are 30%, well, then everybody wins. You got to see HSS. We got to avoid the surgery. HSS still gets their exorbitant fee-for-service costs. Everybody wins.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that's much more likely. Having said that, to be clear, it's A, consistent with the model, and B, not something we're going to do over the next 3 to 6 months.
Like, as we're talking about like physician and behavior change, like, have there been conversations around building a physician pipeline? So like getting doctors that are just establishing their practices and providing like data resources and things that are easy for us to provide to like have them create practices that would be in line with something we're interested in.
I think it's a very good idea, and something that Gunjan will take offline. But you know, we're as you said before, like a little bit in inning number 2 or something like this on that, and that's probably something for a little bit. But we talked a little bit with Sinai, who always has like new doctors coming online and need to fill their panels and whatever. So we talked a little bit about that, but not seriously.
Is there ever like groups of physicians that control the hospitals? I know you were said like physicians are the one that drives care to the facilities. Is it ever where there's a large physician group that we could be more integrated with that could control the hospital? And is that something that even exists? Are we looking for that? Or is it always the opposite, where the hospital is the one in control, they have the employed physicians?
Well, typically, if there's a financial relationship, meaning if one entity owns the hospital and the doctors, typically that entity gets, because more of the dollars are in the hospital, that becomes a hospital-driven organization. It's just the difference. So if they're literally one entity, it's just a hospital system, and it looks like everything else. If they're a different thing, like an ARC in San Antonio or ProHealth out in Long Island, and they have no financial connection or direct financial connection to the hospital system, cool. However, what that means is you have to get a contract with both of them. And what you would have to believe is that that group is so good at keeping people out of the hospital that it will make up for the bad unit costs that you're going to get, because the hospital knows for sure, that they're not dummies, if you're going to have a network called a group that's in charge of getting people out of my hospital, they're not going to love that, right? And so that whole world in individual, where unit cost is so key, and the ability to manage the population is a little less, tends to be not so good, and so thus we have this hospital-driven strategy, and then filling in the positions around it. In Medicare, there's a little bit more of a debatable argument, because the unit costs are actually tighter around Medicare, and there's much greater ability to influence utilization. So there's a more plausible argument around a physician-led strategy, although even then you still need a contract from the hospital and whatever. So you probably still have to start with the hospital to make sure they're cool with it, but you want to weigh them a little more differently. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Okay, thank you everybody, we're out of time.